Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the ranking member for his co-sponsorship, his leadership with this issue. I rise today on behalf of our 9/11 victims, first responders, and their families, urging my colleagues to vote yes on the Never Forget the Heroes, James Zadroga, Ray Pfeifer, and Luis Alvarez Permanent Authorization of the September 11th Victim Compensation Act. First responders who worked on the pile day and night, aiding in the search, rescue, and cleanup efforts, were breathing in toxic debris and ash that are now known to have caused over 50 different types of cancer. In 2011, the Zadroga Act was signed into law to help them, and 5 years later, it was permanently reauthorized and included $4.6 billion for the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund, the very fund that we are here debating today. But in February, the special master of the fund reported that current funding may be insufficient to compensate all claims, reporting they would have to cut claims by up to 70%. As was noted in the aftermath of 9/11, the EPA told New Yorkers and these first responders that the air at Ground Zero and the surrounding area was safe to breathe. The federal government was wrong. My colleagues, this was not a hurricane or a flood or a tornado. This was the largest terrorist attack ever on American soil. As Jon Stewart testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee, these terrorists weren't saying death to Tribeca. This was an attack on all of us as Americans, and we all should be voting yes today as Americans. But yet we're forcing sick first responders to come to Washington, D.C. to beg for benefits that they earned and were promised. Last month, Luis Alvarez was one of those first responders who, after his appearance in D.C., rushed home for his 69th round of chemo. Unfortunately, he immediately ended up in hospice and passed away. He shouldn't have had to come down here to fight on behalf of all of these other victims and first responders in the first place. Month after month, year after year, going back to the first time the Zadroga Act was passed, how many first responders have made dozens of trips, educating, advocating, passionately asking members of Congress for their support? Like so many 9/11 first responders, this was not Lou's first time coming to D.C., not in the long shot. It was not his second or third time, but unfortunately it was his last. Lou Alvarez was an extraordinary man, but what is truly extraordinary is that his spirit and grit represents that of each and every one of our 9/11 first responders. Think of all of those firefighters and others who rushed up to the towers when everyone else was running away. For those who ignored orders telling them to vacate the tower because they would not leave behind their captain. And the experience for us in the New York area, when we meet someone when we're back home in our districts, day after day after day, people who look larger than life, healthy, fit on 9/11, but no, after going through multiple rounds of chemo, they're losing their battle, their bodies riddled with all forms of cancer because they exposed themselves to that harm when the federal government told them it was safe. I would like to thank everyone who has worked so hard to get this bill passed, including my colleagues Carolyn Maloney, Jerry Nadler, Pete King, and others. I would also like to recognize the Feel Good Foundation, Jon Stewart, Shepard Smith for his reporting, and so many others who have been fighting tooth and nail to make the passage of this bill a reality. I urge every single one of my colleagues in this House to vote yes. I urge the Senate to take up this bill immediately. And I yield back.